Castlemaine Collective that we formed in the last 2 weeks.
Yes, go on, tell us about it.
So I just really responded to the pandemic and thought, you know, we really do need a rapid response. And
live. Wait, no, error has occurred, but
we are live.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Right. Okay, so, oh my goodness, we are here. Very exciting. So, my name is Natalie Moxham, and I would like to welcome you all to our first show called Castlemaine Commons. Before we begin, I'd like to hand over to Aunty Julie McHale for an acknowledgement.
I would like to acknowledge the country that we're on. I would particularly like to acknowledge the Nelson family, Uncle Brian and Uncle Rick, who, Uncle Brian was a great mentor, and Uncle Rick is a mentor now for many people in the community. And in my language, I'll say Milathina Nika, Milathina Mana, Warunta, means we are this country is us, which is pretty pertinent. I'd like to start with something that I've been reflecting on while this has been happening. And we call country the area where we live. So the DjaDjaWurrung Country is all around central Victoria, quite a large area. And the definition of a pandemic is a disease which is prevalent over a whole country or the world. And I just wanted to remind people that this certainly isn't the first pandemic that has been in central Victoria. The first one hit in the 1800s when the smallpox travelled down from New South Wales, from where the convicts landed, and it wiped out a lot of the DjaDjaWurrung people. In actual fact, the belief was that 2/3 of the population were wiped out by smallpox, which amounts to about 2,400 people just in central Victoria. So that was a huge pandemic. And then the second pandemic, which followed closely, well, not that closely after that, but in the 1850s, was, of course, syphilis. And Major Mitchell wrote in one of his journals that 90% of the Aboriginal women were suffering from syphilis. I'm not quite sure how he tested that or he came up with that figure, but that's what he thought. On a personal level, sort of what's happened with me is I am diabetic, I am Aboriginal, and so I very much have been isolating. But probably the main thing is I have my elderly mother and stepfather who live next door to me. My mum's 88. She has pulmonary fibrosis, so I don't want to pick up anything because I don't want to pass anything on to her. So people may not have seen me around as much as I have been, and it's that sort of really is sort of like getting me down, because I believe that I'm an elder in the Aboriginal community in Castlemaine, and I need to be there for the people that are in the community. But at the moment, I'm sort of weighing up between my health, my parents' health, and I know that there's a brilliant group of people that are working in Castlemaine that are out and about doing stuff. Kat Koff, Melinda Harper, Courtney, I can't remember Courtney's last name, Claire Barker, Declan. They're working really hard in this situation because a lot of our people are struggling with food and stuff like that. So the Murnau Mummers are preparing little food packages, which are then delivered to the Aboriginal families within the community. What else can I say? The the main things that I guess have changed for our community, we're a very tight-knit community and a very small group of people, Aboriginal people, do a lot of the stuff that keeps our community together, such as the meeting place, Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Week, that sort of stuff. And of course, all those things are not happening at the moment. Murnau Mamas are still getting together to make up the food packages. And, you know, like there were lots of projects and things that we started that have now come to a halt. On a philosophical level, the relationship with country for Aboriginal people is really hard to explain. And if we could explain it clearly, you would see that the whole COVID-19 crisis is connected to country. But when I talk country, I'm not just talking about the trees and the ground and the rocks and the flowers and the animals. I'm talking about us and our relationship to it. Country is our heart, our soul. We relate to country, and over, you know, like many years, this country has been decimated, and I think not enough people in this community or any other community in Australia are really listening to country enough. They're not. Country speaks to you if you're willing to listen, and the whole concept of the pandemic has come from people all over the world not connecting to country whatsoever. And when I say connecting to country, that doesn't mean you go out for a bushwalk and look at the pretty flowers. I'm talking about actually really connecting to it. So it's part of your being. It's a part of who you are. It's the way I often describe it is, you know, you've got country as the base, and its country has been developed through the dreaming and the ancestral beings and things like that. So then you've got country. Then sitting just above country are the elders, because the elders hold country together. And then from the elders come our laws, LORES. So the way we act, the way we are, the way we be. And a simple way of describing that, that the children at the meeting place actually developed was YO, which is YOE. And it's all about respect yourself, respect others, respect the environment. And if everybody in the world was doing that, we wouldn't have this pandemic. And then from those sort of laws or rules, then that comes what often people see Aboriginal culture as. So, so you've got your dance, your song lines, your teaching. Well, your teachings actually come from the elders. So you've got country, elders, teachings. Then the teachings direct everything else. So visual art, just everything we do, ceremony, even, you know, like how we grow things, how we, you know, like if we go out to kill an animal to eat, what we do about that. I think most of the people in the world, no, I shouldn't say most, because perhaps that's not fair, but people see animals and plants and other people as something that we have to, that are there to serve us, which isn't the case. And the way, you know, like animals and things are treated all over the world is absolutely appalling. And the way, you know, like the plants and things like that, you know, like cutting down rainforests and stuff like that. So if I'm rambling, let me know. So I believe that we've overpopulated the world, and it's continuing to be overpopulated, and this poor old earth can't support us any longer, or can't support us the way we want to be supported. So we need to sort of think about how we can learn from the elders, how we can learn, I do have to say, from Indigenous peoples all over the world, because Indigenous peoples are the ones that usually hold the meaning, the teaching, the strategies to use when we're working together. In terms of just our people, you know, things like the pandemic is affecting our mob because we suffer from a lot of illnesses that have been brought here from elsewhere. So illnesses that we've already got, that the COVID-19 will kill us if we get it. So things like diabetes. I'm diabetic. Most of the Aboriginal people I know are diabetic. Then the overcrowding in houses, you know, that wasn't something that was an issue, but now in a lot of communities, the houses, oh, sorry, something strange came up on the screen, but it's all right, I just got rid of it. The other thing that concerns me greatly is I've worked out at the Loddon and the Middleton prison, and there are a lot of Aboriginal people in both those settings, and I really worry about prisoners. The conditions that they live in are very conducive for people to, contract various diseases and that. So the Aboriginal, like the percentage-wise, Aboriginal people are incarcerated a lot more than any other Australian group. And in that sense, it's our people that are going to suffer again. And then, of course, you get to the homelessness. You know, you've got crowded houses, but there's an awful lot of homelessness with Aboriginal people. And I know that goes right across the board, but I'm speaking from an Aboriginal perspective. I'm watching I've got a little timer here, so I don't want to over talk, which is something that I do very readily. And I'd just like to give you a little quote from Walpurgi man, Jumper Jimpu, who I'm very good friends with. And some of you may have met him. He comes down to Castlemaine fairly regularly. And he actually said, country is meant for you to look after, but country is also meant to look after you. So if it's a two-way stream, country looks after us if we look after it.
Yeah.
So is that the sort of stuff you were after, or did you want me to talk about something else? Has anybody got a question?
Aunty Julie, what we might do is come back to you. I think you've raised a number of different points that I'd like to bring other people in on the conversation as well.
No worries.
Can you just click on your little video icon again?
Start video.
Yeah, we can't see you.
Oh, here I am.
Yeah.
So, Aunty Julie, I think that, thank you for those contributions. You've bubbled up a whole lot of points that we wanted to debate and discuss. I really like just to do a bit of a pitch about why we're here. A number of us about 3 or 4 weeks ago got together and we formed the Castlemaine Collective, just gave ourselves a name, and we are putting on these weekly shows. These are we're calling them the Castlemaine Commons, and we're going to live stream them to YouTube once a week. Particularly, the project is rapidly responding to the pandemic situation in our rural community. We wanted to listen to our voices and see each other. We wanted to help people understand that for them to socialise, we need to help people shift to using digital technology to help each other socialise. But also, because of the uncertainty and the discombobulation that COVID-19 is presenting the world, it's also the perfect chance to embrace what we have in common. And the term commons means it's the cultural and natural resources accessible to all members of society, including natural materials, air, the water we breathe, the land that we live on. And I really think that description is nowhere near as good as the way that Aunty Julie just described country then. So in a lot of ways, Castlemaine Commons is, for me, the pandemic has really made us think about who we are, who is humanity, and who is this world that we live on. And it's been an incredible equaliser. So this program, Castlemaine Commons, is really trying to tap into that and to listen to local people, talk to each other, think about things that are going on, and acknowledge the fact that this change is phenomenal. And we need to digest it and process it together. So a number of us, Tim Adam, Matthew Abboud, Emma King and I have got together and Alex Kelly have got together to put this show on, so that people do have the opportunity to talk to each other live. We're coming each week. We'll ask you at the end for feedback and input. So really quickly, we've already heard from Aunty Julie McHale. I'd also like to introduce, I'm going to run through the speakers. Christine Henderson, the Mount Alexander Shire Council Mayor and Coliban Ward Councillor. We've also got here Niamh O'Conner Smith, who is a Year 12 student at Castlemaine Secondary College, and she's a passionate activist and organiser for the School Strike for Climate. And we've also got Dr. Susie Burke, who is a psychologist, writer and parent with background in disaster psychology and environmental psychology. So welcome everybody. And now I'm going to hand, the big question tonight is what has just happened in our world? So over to you, Christine.
I just have to ask, is Declan part of this or is he just a bomber?
No, Declan's part of this.
All right, okay.
Hey, Declan.
Yeah, I will
Yeah,
continue.
Natalie, do you want to just mention who I am, or otherwise I just look like I'm just.
We haven't actually named him yet. Who are you, Declan?
Sorry, Declan Ferber-Gillick has also joined us. He's part of our collective and he's going to, Declan, would you like to introduce yourself quickly? He's going to be posing some questions with us a bit later on. Declan?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Natalie, and thanks to Aunty Julie for that, and thanks to everyone. Yeah, I came in a little bit late. Natalie's invited me specifically to come be a part of an observing and questioning part of the forum tonight. I'm a Arunda artist, activist, cultural organiser and educator, and amongst other things, a musician and playwright. And I've been living on DjaDjaWurrung Country since about October. And yeah, I work with Natalie in a few different fields, but yeah, amongst other things, I'm a community and cultural organiser and educator. So thanks for having me, and look forward to being part of ongoing discussions. Thanks.
Cheers, Declan. We have a number of us that are involved in the collective, and we're going to share the co-hosting. Some of us are in the background doing the tech. Other people are doing show production, things like that. So I'd like to now hand over to Christine to share with us your thoughts on what's just happened.
What has just happened? Oh, Natalie, yeah. So what happened? Well, I became mayor a few months ago, as you do, for a year. And my calendar filled with all these things to do, and including, there's the business of council, which rolls on week after week. But then the mayor goes to a lot of things. Mayor gets invited to say a few words at people's gatherings. So I was going to hand out badges at Castlemaine North. I was going to go to the Pioneers and Old Residents annual get together. And I was never been to that before. I thought that sounds interesting. Pioneers and Old Residents. And then I was going to go to Royal Australians for Refugees, have a picnic. I'm just thinking about the particular week when suddenly my diary went blank. Suddenly everything had to be deleted because it wasn't happening anymore. And I thought, oh, okay, so that's happening to me. But all these organisations, all these groups of people that have been planning their big gig, if you like, in many cases, they've been working together towards it for weeks or months, in some cases, the whole year, and it's gone. That's it. All that work, cancelled, can't get together. We just managed to squeeze in my eldest grandson's 18th birthday party, a family do, at our place, and we had the whole family there, and it was great. And then the next week we couldn't do it. I mean, we're lucky we managed to do that. Going to Castlemaine and seeing shops closing, I thought, you know, the mayor's got to go and get a bit of smart gear for winter. And goes down to the local shops because I like to buy local, and oh, all the clothes shops are closed. Well, not all of them. The men's land's still open, which is great. But all the others are closed, of course, because who's going to buy, you know, nice clothes when you're just going to sit in front of a screen? And, you know, no one's going out much anymore. Seeing how the art shop, there's the art shop. I like this, you can see I dabble. And so Mark in the art shop realised that his shop's too small to allow people in and still do the social distancing. So now he's inside the shop. You go to the door and you text your order through to him on your phone, or you ring him up, and he, you know, there he is reading it, and then brings it to the door, and you pay with an EFTPOS that way. So people are being very creative. Though, you know, shops are being some, like the Theatre Royal's gone online. You can buy food from them online. And Mulberry's, you know, Togg's my favourite cafe just across the road from the Civic Centre, which is an important watering hole for me when I'm a mayor and in the office most of the days, trot across the road and get, you know, decent Togg's lunch, and suddenly they're closed. But you can still order stuff from them online, and so, but that's, you know, that's the easy bit. And I'm lucky. I mean, my younger daughter decided, I think like quite a few people who are living in town, in share houses or in small places, suddenly thought, you know what, that place I ran away from 20 years ago or 10 years ago, because I just wanted to get out of that hole called, in this case, Taradale, and go and live in the big city. Suddenly it's got a lot of appeal. You know, I can live in this relatively small house, but gee, I've got a lot of open country around me. So that's, I think there's quite a few people come home to live with the parents. And that's nice, you know. So there's 3 of us. I'm lucky we've got 3 at home. I know a lot of people are living by themselves, and that must be really hard, because we're being told there's only 4 reasons to go out, and you can't go shopping every day, can you? And work. Some people are still going to work, and of course Niamh now has to stay at home for education too, so that you can't even go to school like you did last term, and or go to the doctors. So I guess we're getting used to it, and then you think, oh, you know, you see what's happening around the world, and you think, oh my goodness me, are we so lucky? Are we so lucky that our government actually listen to the experts? You know, they won't listen to the climate change experts, they won't listen to a whole lot of things, but they actually listen to the epidemiologists and went, uh-oh, right, if we don't do something serious now, then we're going to be in the same hole as Italy, Spain, UK, all these places. So, you know, in terms of Castlemaine, well, I live in Taradale, so I see how do I see Castlemaine operating? I see what's on Castlemania. I see, you know, Facebook's become a lot more interesting place these days, and even Castlemania, instead of going, oh, I don't think I want to read that, people are posting some really helpful stuff. Yeah. Who are the people in hardship? Who are the people in hardship? Julie knows about them. Yeah, I know about the people who are in emotional hardship because of being isolated, because of being worried about, are they going to have enough money to live on? Suddenly their income's disappeared. We know the government, you know, has made some what would have been absolutely impossible moves a year ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and have suddenly turned us into a socialist state. You know, great, they're going to give people money. But in terms of having to cope on your own and not know if you're going to get one of those payments, or living in a situation where you don't feel safe, then it's really hard, I think. I get emails from people asking me if they can do certain things, or if it's safe to do this, or are they allowed to do that, and I think, well, I don't know, I'm not the authorities. But yeah, I can realise people are scared about stepping over the line and suddenly being in trouble too. That's the other thing. But you know, I started making a list of the positive things that are coming out of this. Like, first of all, the government suddenly has decided that, you know, that awful paltry amount of money that people were getting called New Start suddenly has to be doubled. Well, isn't that great? I think that's fantastic. At last, they're going to give people enough money to live on. It might not be a great living, but at least they're going to get something. So they're not going to be from week to week having to scrounge and beg and live on each other's floors all the time, and, you know, couch surf, etc. They're actually probably going to have enough money. Yes, that's something. I noticed that Aunty Julie, the rest of the world is just doing fine, isn't it? I noticed that I walk out of my door in the morning and I think, oh, goodness me, the trees are all right. They're not suffering. Yeah, the birds are okay. Yeah, they're arriving just the way they do every autumn, the ones that come. Everything else is fine. It's just us humans. So it's a very interesting thing to see.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Thank you, Christine. I'd like now to invite Niamh O'Conner Smith to talk to us. So Niamh, what do you think? What has just happened for you?
What's happened for me?
And what have you noticed?
Well, you know, it was all happened last week at school when government really decided to crack down and shut schools down. So holidays started early, which was a bit weird. But apart from holidays, like, you couldn't see anyone. It was really weird. Normally it's the time you get to de-stress and see people, and you just couldn't see anyone because we were all trapped at home. And that made it really weird. But it did force, but also you want to connect in other ways. So me and my friends, like I said, had group chats and Zoom calls and trying to find other ways to have social connection when you can't see each other face to face. And I think that's forcing a lot of people to form those bonds and can grow connection and check in on others, because it is a stressful time. So the whole nature of this is that it's kind of forcing people to grow connections, which is amazing. But today we had the first day of school. So that's the one major thing that has been stressing personally me out during the school holidays, which was, well, from like 2 weeks ago, from yesterday and last 2 weeks. And what's been stressing me about is how year 12 is going to go and how the government was going to deal with the COVID pandemic and its effect on education. So we had online school today, and that was interesting, a bit chaotic, but it worked. So we're online for a term, never seen or heard or done before. Students all over Victoria. It's a bit crazy. The internet is a bit wacky at times, not always there, but that's okay. We got through it. And it's kind of stressful because they pushed year 12 exams back. They've changed. Yeah. But really, that's something we needed to make the change to lockdown schools before the spread happened more quickly, because if we didn't lock down schools, then 700 kids in one location was going to continue the spread and not flatten the curve, which would overrun hospitals, and then we'd see a lot of unnecessary deaths, which is not good. The other thing that I see is the fact that as a school strike organiser, we were planning to have a massive strike on May 15th, which now cannot go ahead in the normal sense of a strike, as we cannot have mass gatherings, but we are planning things and things are in the works. So May 15th is going ahead, if anyone's wondering, but it'll be online. We're still trying to figure out how to do that, but that should be exciting. But I have noticed that the climate crisis in general has kind of been swamped by this pandemic. And it's not talked about because everyone's COVID-19 focused. And I think, yes, we must be COVID-19 focused because it is a current pandemic, but the climate crisis is also a crisis that we need to be attentive. And like our government has shown us that they can spend billions of dollars to tackle a crisis, and they have the money, but they just had no will to do it for the climate crisis. And like still currently, I think they're letting coal miners fly across the country and out of the country and interstate. They locked our borders, but like not quite, because they're still letting billionaire companies continue to export coal and gas and other fossil fuels and continue to mine and to work, which really shouldn't work. And it shouldn't be done, one, because we need to move away from fossil fuels and towards renewables, and two, because we need to lock down borders as much as possible to stop the spread of the pandemic. Yep. Otherwise.
Thanks, Niamh. That's some great comments there. Thanks for joining us tonight in your busy Year 12 schedule.
Thank you.
I was so worried about the Year 12 students. So we're going to come back to some of those questions in a minute, Niamh, but I might just quickly cut to Susie Burke first, just to let you know that we're recording this program, so if people want to watch it later, they can, and refer other people to it. And we really would encourage, feedback and ideas for the next show as well. So now we'd like to hear from Dr. Susie Burke.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Well, I should just clarify, I'm not a medical doctor, I am a psychology doctor, a PhD doctor. So that I have no expertise in how to treat COVID-19 from a medical perspective. So yes, this question of what's just happened to my world. Well, I was actually a bit like Christine, had my diary full with a whole lot of bushfire recovery workshops and talks and webinars and things like that were building up just after this horrendous summer of bushfires. And my recent series of lectures that I was giving to some psychology students at a college, I ended up making it was going to be on climate change. I always say if I have to talk about disasters, then I want to end up talking about climate change as well. And I made this last one actually on COVID-19 and looking at the psychology of a global pandemic, but also linking it to loss of biodiversity and climate change and what this actually means, what are the similarities between coping with COVID-19 and coping with the existential threat of climate change, just to keep the psychology students on their toes, because I agree with Niamh that this is an extraordinarily important conversation that needs to keep happening. So a lot of the changes that have happened for me personally have been around the fact that I thought this year 2 of my children were going to leave home. So I spent a lot of time in January feeling very sad about that and thinking, oh, what's my life going to be? My children are leaving home. Oh, it was so much fun when they were little. And only one of them actually made it to the airport and out of the country, straight into the coronavirus hotspot in Austria at the time, and then had to spend several weeks in quarantine over there, and then had to come home and spend a few more weeks in quarantine. So he's only just returned home to my pantry just in the last few days. And it seems now nobody's leaving home. So that was part of the adjustment that we've all been making here, for which I'm very grateful. A bit like Christine, it's very lovely to have all the children home. But now I'm thinking, are they ever going to leave? And this is one of the many uncertainties that we're faced with at the moment. And so the other difference, I suppose, an enormous difference really, is that I am still busy working as a psychologist, but doing a lot of that work on Zoom. And so, the period of adjustment in that is what it feels like to be spending the entire day talking to people in depth about their experience of COVID-19, but doing it by looking at a screen like this. And I walk outside afterwards and I have to retrain my eyes to look into the horizon a bit. And I'm struggling to make the transition out of my tracksuit pants. I've started to fancy up the top of me, but I'm still doing the leisure wear down below. And I'm trying to get into the dress up box so that I can just jazz it up a little bit, because, this does require creative responses as we deal with this. But I just wanted to go back and talk a little bit about the coronavirus as a disaster, and because that's the language that I, think of when I think about the global pandemic. And so I went to refresh myself about what the actual definition of a disaster was, and the International Federation of Red Cross calls it a sudden and calamitous event that seriously disrupts society and communities, and overburdens the community from being able to actually deal with it using their resources. And so that's clearly what this pandemic means for us all around the world. But the other thing I'm really struck by is that the disaster is different in different parts of the world. Our disaster here in Mount Alexander Shire is completely different to the disaster that's unfolding in New York and in London and in Madrid at the moment. And I think that's a really interesting part about how do we come to terms with and cope with it. And the disaster in Mount Alexander Shire is also hugely different for different people. Like Julie was talking to us about, her people that have, got chronic health problems, who are hugely vulnerable and can't risk at all getting sick because of the high threat of them dying. And Christine was talking about, and I see this in my practice as well, people who are in very difficult home situations, who actually might have been trying to leave an abusive relationship and are stuck at home with the person that they've been trying to leave, with some great uncertainty about how that's going to go and what's going to happen next. And there are some people, like maybe the introverts, who are thinking, yeah, this is just exactly what I love having. Everybody's home with me and it's great. And the extroverts are all going slightly mad already, even though it's only been a couple of weeks. And anybody with small children is going slightly mad as well. And the literature certainly bears that out, that the people who find it very stressful in quarantine are those with small children. But then, as Christine mentioned, there's also the people that are living at home and what that's like for them. And then there's the people who've got a husband, a dearly beloved husband or wife, who's in a nursing home, who can't go and see them anymore, with at great threat to the people in those homes' lives. So everybody's experience of the disaster is hugely different. And so this brings me to the point that I've been thinking a lot about just in the last few days about, and I've been talking about it a lot actually with my clients as well, is how this pandemic for us is what we call an ambiguous loss. So that's a loss that involves unimaginable circumstances that results in ambiguity or uncertainty. And these are often more complex types of losses for people to deal with, because we haven't done this before and we don't know what we're grieving for, and we don't know how to move forward. And we've all got our own different versions of that. And so again, if we look overseas at how the pandemic is unfolding, with mass deaths and 10-hour waits for an ambulance to come and makeshift morgues, we're looking at that and thinking, is that what's going to happen here? And if so, when? And even the shutdowns that we have here in our own community have disrupted life in enormous ways. And we don't yet know what's going to happen here, or when, or whatever. The ultimate impacts on the economy are unknown. We don't know if we are going to have a huge influx of infections and deaths at the moment. And there are no straightforward answers to this sort of complex, ever-changing problem. And so that makes ambiguous losses really hard to cope with. And it's really hard ever to get a sense of mastery over an ambiguous loss as well, because it's sort of unrealistic, it's changing. And so then I've been very interested in, well, psychologically, how do we come to terms with that and cope with that? And, as a psychologist, of course, one of the things that I spend all my days with people is about getting them to talk about their feelings and make room for their feelings. And I think that's a really central part of what we have to do, is to allow ourselves to really feel it, and to remember that it's completely normal to feel sad and bad and lost and scared, and it's completely normal to feel emotionally exhausted or frustrated or overwhelmed or frightened. It's also incredibly normal to be feeling this existential threat. I mean, Niamh, you talked a little bit about that with climate change. This is an existential threat in that it threatens our very lives, but a lot of people that I've been speaking to are also hugely anxious about what this does mean for progress on climate change, which is going to way outshadow the impacts of the pandemic, even despite how bad the pandemic is. And so these are all completely normal things for people to be feeling, and it's really important that we give ourselves time to sort of feel our way through that and adjust to it. And then the other thing that I've been thinking about is how important it is, and this is a lovely forum for us to be doing this, is to share how we're feeling about it with other people, because for starters, it normalizes how we're feeling if we can talk about it with other people. But it also gives us a sense of that shared humanity that, Christine, you were talking about. And that's nice. And it also gives us a connection with other people, which is awesome thing to be able to do in a time of not being able to hug anybody. We can have our connections by sharing our feelings. And there's this American psychologist called Margaret Klein Solomon, who's one of the leading climate emergency mobilization people in America. And she talks about how important it is for us to learn to be scared together and to agree on what we're terrified about, because it's only when we do that that we can get radical action happening to declare an emergency to solve this pandemic. And of course, she goes on to talk about how important it is to have those shared agreement about what we're scared about around climate change as well, to get that radical action as well. That's sort of a different story. Yeah, so those are some of the things that I've been thinking about. And another one of the really important tasks that I think we face, and Natalie, you sort of talked about this in your introduction, is the importance of finding meaning. Like, humans are meaning-making creatures, and it's one of the ways in which we can really cope and I suppose thrive in a disaster, if it's okay to think about that. And I mean, even to decide that this catastrophe or this pandemic is senseless and has no meaning is a way of making meaning anyhow. And people do catch glimpses in a disaster of a sort of a future that they might want to have, or that they feel that they need. And it is a time when people can really make some profound changes. And I think one of the things that I hope is that we can allow this pandemic to forever change us, that we don't go back to being normal, because it wasn't normal what was happening. Julie was talking about that, Niamh was talking about that, the way in which we have been treating the planet and treating each other, and the huge discrepancies between the haves and the have-nots really isn't normal. So let's not go back to that. So let's allow ourselves to be changed and to create some meaning from this. And yeah, so if I think about, well, what meaning has it sort of made to, you know, what meaning have I construed at the moment? I suppose one of the things that I've been thinking about is how I shouldn't have fussed so much about my children leaving home, because it never happened. And I've been wondering if the meaning was that you should be careful what you wish for, because there was a few times when I was thinking to myself, oh, I really don't want them to go away. And then they came back. And now I'm thinking that maybe it's a good thing for them to go away, because them going away would mean there's no longer a global pandemic, and that would be an awesome thing. So the last thing that I just wanted to talk about really quickly was another thing that is coming up increasingly more in the disaster literature at the moment, is this thing called post-traumatic growth, which is this phenomena of people thriving in the face of adversity and disasters. And, you know, we've all got the capacity to do that. And it's sort of characterized by 5 things, really. It's when people have got a renewed appreciation for life. And I think that's certainly what I've been hearing from people as they muse over what this has meant to them, that they are really appreciative of the things they have got and appreciative of the beautiful nature, a bit like what you were talking about, Christine. And it's a heightened importance of relationships with others, so improved relationships with others. I think that's something that everybody in our community has been working really hard at doing, contacting the neighbours. Natalie, you were saying next session's going to be on these neighbourhood resilience groups, and that's a huge part of that. Finding new possibilities in life, developing sort of personal strength. I suppose that's inner strength muscles to be able to cope with this. And it often also involves some sort of spiritual change as well. But it is something that we can all be capable of, is sort of allowing ourselves to be changed in a way for the positive as we navigate these really difficult, potentially even worse ahead of us times together.
And that's great, Susie, because that's very much what we were hoping that this discussion and dialogue would help us do together, and that we would probably need to do it together in our community, visually being able to see each other. So thank you, everybody, for those conversations. Declan, you've just turned into a painting.
Beautiful.
I was just about to cut it. Hey, Dec, might you have a question to pose?
Yeah, thank you to everybody. The one thing that I was thinking, and there's sort of, everyone can sort of answer this, but And I'm not sure, how do I pronounce it? Niamh? Niamh, sorry, Niamh.
That's okay.
I'm sure you get that question 4 times a day.
Yeah.
So my question for you, regarding your work as a climate activist and someone who's, you know, very much keeping at the forefront of your mind and your own, and, you know, and your peers are keeping the climate crisis quite rightly at the forefront of your imaginations and thinking during this period. My question for you is, now that we as a global population, and we as a local and as a national population have seen that a global, you know, our global leaders and our local leaders do have the capacity to act in ways that they say in pre-coronavirus that they denied they were able to, or there's been this obvious feet dragging that we know about. How do you see that it's time for activists and young people to leverage this crisis? And I know I've heard people talk about this quote, I don't know who said it exactly, but this idea of never letting a crisis go to waste. And my question for you and your peers and activists and people in the climate movement is, how do we leverage this this moment so that people don't forget that we know that global leaders can act in a very coordinated and very immediate way to take serious large-scale economic measures? So my question for you is, how are you and your cohort leveraging this period of crisis?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the important thing is what is now is not normal. But the other important thing is we don't want to go back to what was normal, because what was normal was not good. And so it's about continuing that pressure and using the fact that you have the government so far has responded to the coronavirus and put out the stimulus package and spend lots of money, and leveraging that and being like, you must spend more and you must put more time and put more politics, more laws and restrictions into
Oh, Niamh, you've frozen.
Oh, she has.
Oh dear.
Niamh, we've lost you. You've frozen.
Yeah. Oh dear. Oh.
We might just wait for Niamh to come back. Susie, do you have any?
Does anyone else want to pick up on that? Yeah.
Oh, geez, it's a challenge, isn't it? It's, I mean, the pandemic is, yeah, when people are dying and the exponential curves, being a net exponential curve, then.
Sorry, everyone. My internet went down, which is a classic.
Yeah, it got you. And only we could point out to them, look, we've got other exponential curves happening in this world, and it's called climate change.
Yes. But part of that leverage, I don't know where I got up to, but part of it would be working from May 15th. And although we can't have action where we all get together, because that would not be wise, but trying to leverage the online movement towards the government. And so leveraging May 15th and trying to make that as big as possible online, which is still in the works. We're not quite sure how we're going to do that.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's just something that I've just been writing things down. And one of the things that this has presented is, because people aren't travelling around and driving around and sending out emissions right, left and centre and that sort of stuff, there's a lot of observations that people have made, like I can't even remember which country it is, but they can actually see mountains now that they've never been able to see, because the pollution rate has dropped so dramatically in like 2 months. People are saying that birds and other creatures are a lot louder. It's not that they're any louder, it's just that we can hear them now. So I think one of the things you could do is, as Declan said, never let a disaster go to waste, in that you now have proof that just by, like stopping some of this stuff, or being more sensible in the way you do stuff, we can change the world, and we can bring climate change, well, hopefully to a halt one day, but at least reduce it. And Yeah, I just wanted to sort of mention that to you, because that's one of the positives, I believe, of this pandemic.
Yeah, and I think that is a real positive. But we also need to, and I'm sure you know this, that that while we're seeing reduction in carbon emissions and things like that, we aren't seeing climate justice, and we are still seeing people.
Oh no, absolutely not. No, I agree totally.
And we are seeing people left behind in this pandemic still, and our government, while having released a stimulus package, which it still is not going to cover everyone, and people are still going to get left behind. And I think part of this is we need to leverage this to make our government see that we do need climate justice, and that we can't leave anyone behind in this movement for climate action and a better future amidst this pandemic.
Susie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, that one of the things that I was reading the other day coming out of America was some commentary, which I'm quite familiar with, about how it's difficult to use disasters as a time to have people also want to talk about climate crisis or climate change when they're in the middle of dealing with the disaster. And that's certainly the case for people in the UK and America at the moment, but it's not necessarily the case for us at the moment. So in a way, because our crisis has been slowed and we've got this much lower infection rates, there's actually the possibility that people do have the energy to, to cope with, this narrative about the climate crisis here in Australia, and that maybe those that are in other parts of the world need us in Australia to really push that. And the other thing that I was thinking about, and it's about this idea of essential workers. I've actually loved watching how some people didn't realise they were essential, and all of a sudden they're an essential worker, and you can see them sort of, feel a little bit proud about that. And I have found that it's improved some of the relationships of couples that I've been working with. They suddenly look at each other and go, "Oh, we're essential." Well, we really do think very highly of each other now. But the essential work for other people who are not perhaps fully employed at the moment could be this essential work of making sure that the changes that we make go thoroughly in the direction of also, creating climate justice and a sustainable society forever.
Jack, might you have another question? I've got one from the chat line to conclude in a few minutes, but maybe one more from you.
Yeah, I really liked that the way that Susie transitioned into talking about that idea of the essential worker. And I think there was a question we might come back to maybe later, or maybe we won't, but there was a question I wanted to talk a bit about a unionized workforce, but I might just skip and make it a bit of a broader question. This might come into part of it, but another question I want to ask is about this idea that it's another quote that I can't remember the source of, but this idea that to get through a crisis, a population will reach for whatever ideas happen to be lying around at the moment. And we've talked a little bit about some of the good ideas that are around, and I think that there's a lot of focus on the good ideas, and that's great. And I also want to ask people, what do people think are some of the bad ideas that are lying around at the moment that we would be very good to be wary of and good to be to steer clear of? What's in the collective and the public and the kind of social psyche that we might see governments or individuals or local groups reach for that kind of characterize our times that we would consider to be like bad ideas?
Can I just really quickly, the racism that's reared its head yet again, and I'm not talking about racism towards us, but I know of a family in Castlemaine with young children that prior to the school holidays, they were travelling on the bus, and they're of Chinese descent, and they copped a heap because they were Chinese, and it was their fault that the pandemic was around. So that's one of the bad things that I believe has happened. And our friend Mr. Trump's not helping that in any way, shape or form, because he just sees the whole thing as China's problem. Like China started it, China have got to fix it. So that's one of the bad things that I wanted to.
Thank you, Aunty Julie. Susie, did you want to mention something?
Yeah, the one that just leapt to my mind, Declan, when you were talking, was the risk of shutting down protests. And I was thinking about the refugees and the hefty fines that were given out the other day to the protest that was done as a drive-by in Melbourne. That's one of the bad ideas that could be easily picked up at the moment when the police have greater powers to control us and to fine us, that continue, or that be used for, stemming some of the incredibly important, parts of a democracy as well. And it ties into what Julie's talking about as well, is that, those actions are actually about trying to make sure that refugees, the most disadvantaged, most vulnerable people in our community, are never going to get this, new start unless the rest of us fight for it for them. These are important ways for us to, have voices, and we don't want to see that quashed.
Anybody else? Christine, Niamh?
Just a bit that's kind of more future heading, but as we move out of this pandemic, we have just spent a whole lot of money, much needed money, on a bunch of things, but making sure our government then doesn't spin it to be like, we're in debt, so much debt now that we can't continue to spend, which we must continue to spend, because we must continue to fix things, because, a stimulus package is great for the economy and is going to be great in helping the vulnerable people during this pandemic, but it's not going to help people, and it's not going to fix the climate crisis. So it's the fact that they don't twist that to stop themselves spending on other much valuable things.
Something from you, Christine?
I find it pretty terrifying to think about the economic reality 6 months down the track. I think that the whole world is the whole, we've been in a globalized world for what, 30 years, 40 years, I don't know, really. The multinational corporations running the show for about a generation now, and all our manufacturing having gone to China, etc., over the last 20 years. I don't think anyone really knows how it works. I'm sure we've got the wonderful conspiracy theories zooming around the internet at the moment, but as usual, about the Illuminati and the lizard beings that appear from the center of the earth or now and again and control everything. But I don't think anyone really knows how it works and how the juggling act's going to be to say we can. The desire of centralized governments will be to want to get back to where we were, because that's safe. That's what they know. Somehow it was in perfect work when it was working. And yes, we had these massive deficits, but that's all right because it works. But I don't think we're going to be able to go back there. And I think there's going to be a strong will from the people to not go back to art consumption as a way of driving the economy, having to have growth at all costs. Otherwise, we're all going to be in real disaster, like mass starvation and loss of central control, etc. I think people are going to want to have a gentler, softer kind of world. I don't think cruise ships are going to be very popular for quite a while. No, I guess they snuck up on me. I always thought, God, the terrifying nature of being caught on one of those ships. And then my neighbours have come back from this great cruise. They took their kids, and it was fantastic. And that kind of ubiquitous nature of that kind of thing has become so mainstream, and so that's not going to come back. So that's just a small example of the kind of economics of our country, because we are very based on, our country's wealth is based on real estate, mining. Sorry, Niamh, but that's what it's going to recover. We're going to pay for what's been happening now, and
apart from the fact that they don't pay tax. But anyway,
they pay
For me,
all that stuff, But it's anyway.
Yeah,
I guess what am I trying to say? It's going to be interesting, but I find it quite scary if I try and turn the gaze on it too tightly. I think, no, don't go there. That could be really scary. But I have a kind of trust, and I guess it's a trusting country. It comes down to that, really, that we're going to be looked after. We as a community and we as a planet somehow in this awful thing that we're doing to it, but I think it's sorting us out in some way.
I've been talking to lots of my friends in Papua New Guinea, and that's pretty much what they say. I just wanted to add in there, my key fear and my key thing that worries me is the war language and the conquering of the virus that perpetuates the war language, but also technology and surveillance. And the way in Asia at the moment, you know, you've got these apps that track you, and Google and is it Google and the two, Facebook, getting together and developing technology for surveillance, to surveil us under the guise of tracing and tracking. So that really frightens me. However, we need to move on. I've got a final question that I'd like to put to you that we can kind of conclude on or segue on. Remember, we talked earlier about I've got a quote from Arundhati Roy. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, drag in the carcass of our prejudice and our hatred, our data banks, our dead ideas and our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So on that note, I wanted to ask you the question, for future shows, what conversations do you think we should be continuing? And I'd like to ask you to pose one conversation each.
What conversation should we be posing? I think, what are you prepared to give up?
Yep. That's a great one. Thanks. Susie?
Well, then I'll go for, what are you prepared to relearn?
Yeah, right. That's a good one. Yeah.
Niamh or Aunty Julie? What are the conversations we need to continue to have? Like, for one that I just thought of is the green stimulus, and getting that up, and so we're going to have some guest speakers on to talk about what that is.
Yeah, I guess what will the future look like, or what do we hope the future will look like? That's a very big one, but
you've got to think that before you. Very big one. Great. Yes. Let's start imagining a future.
We have a vision of it to know what we want to make happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Important.
Practically, yeah. Let's get really practical. What does that look like? What does your demonstration in May look like, and how can we support you in that? Aunty Julie, your thoughts?
So many thoughts are zooming around. I've got the one that probably I constantly say I hate money, and this concept of everything has got to be based on economies, and like the economy is more important than human lives, and it's more important than the climate, and it's more important than anything else. And the way of thinking where nothing can be solved unless there's great heaps of money thrown at it. And I understand that's the way the world is, but perhaps we need to revisit the whole, well, I know myself, like I'm a retired teacher, so I have a like a pension, so I'm not struggling for money, but so many, like you hear so many solutions to any problem that I can think of is how much money. Money's got to be thrown out. Money's got to do this. Money's got to do that. And yeah, look, I know that's the reality, but I wonder whether we ever need to sort of think maybe this whole economy greed concept is one of the reasons why it's brought us down. So how can that change? like the airline, Virgin wanting, $2 billion or something from our government to prop them up. That's the only way that they're going to survive. I guess that's how can we support, help, change the future without relying on money?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Economics and alternative economics has definitely been one of the things that we're going to explore in depth. Declan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so the question was like, what are the conversations we need to have?
Yeah, that we need to continue to have.
Yeah, I got two big ones. Big one for me is what's the role in the future of of working people as a class of people, so people who are employed in the economy. What's the role of working people and in particular unions? Because we're seeing an increase in worker unionism for the first time in a while, and I think that basically unionism and independent unions and powers in collective trade unions and people is the antidote to the neoliberalism that's got us here. So that's my one question: is what's the role of, what does work look like in the future, and what's the role of collectivized working people? And then my next question is, how do we support and equip young people who are being born into this world or coming of age in this world to deal with the world that's changing around them? So how do we support them, but also how do we learn from them? And so then the kind of core of that discussion is, how do we break down intergenerational rifts and blocks so that we can communicate across generations as well as ultimately across classes, which is most important for me.
Yeah, cool. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. I've got my finishing notes somewhere here. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the first live show of Castlemaine Commons. Next week, we have our second show, and it's going to be really focused around that moment. I think Susie talked about it briefly, where the busyness of our life has, if we're not in the thick of the United States or Europe, we're here in Australia. And for a lot of us, our life has stopped. It's paused. We're not so busy anymore. We don't have all these things, and we've nestled down in our homes, and we're now rediscovering and reliving, listening to the birds, connecting with our loved ones closely. We're going to really explore that and the neighbourhood, the rise of the neighbourhood resilience groups and what they are, where they are in Castlemaine and surrounds, and what they're doing. So that's going to be our focus. The week after that, so week 3, is going to be a focus really listening and hearing from First Nations people here and from other places as well. And we would like lots more feedback from you about what we should talk about, guests that we should have on, things like that. So if people can put that in the YouTube chat. We have a list of things that are going on in the community that we really wanted to quickly read out to you. So there, like I said, the neighbourhood resilience groups are happening. They have a Facebook page, and we'll talk to them next week. If you are unwell, of course, I'm sure you already know that you need to ring your GP, and also the Department of Health and Human Services, they have an online emergency number. We'll also post that. Mount Alexander has established a community pantry. They are looking for donations, and we're going to have information about how you can access that to get food and or donate to the pantry. Apparently it is frozen pre-prepared meals and food packages made with community spirit care and strict standards of hygiene. The Mount Alexander Shire Council has an emergency response, and they've got a web page on that. We might invite that person in one time to speak as well. Our community health service is operating and functioning as normal, providing services to the most in need in our community. And also the Centre for Non-Violence is still open and operating. Services are running by phone where possible, or they have an on-site delivery service team, and they have a free call number for domestic violence, 1800 884 295 if anybody needs that number. We encourage you to ring it. We'll have all this information up online if people want to access it. So thank you very much for everybody participating. And we see you next week. See you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.